Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today, we've got an early impression on a fragrance I'm wearing as my scent of the day for the very first time. And actually, multiple people sent me this. So this particular, uh, brand sample, proper from the brand, comes from Armando. Thank you, Armando. But also, Allie sent me a nice little decant from her own personal bottle as well. So thank you to everyone who sent me a little bit of this stunning fragrance. I've really enjoyed wearing this as my scent of the day today. And I looked on YouTube before I pressed play on this video, and I noticed there's really only a handful of reviews on this. So it gets almost no love, which is strange because Amouage as a brand has really taken on kind of a new life. There's been the old timers like me who like the old stuff. And then also now there's a lot of new people who are kind of coming into the brand of Amouage with their new releases of stuff like Silver Oud and Royal Tobacco. And, they just put out 4 new offerings. One was Search, stuff like that. So there's I would say a new generation of Amouage fans. And so I'm a little surprised none of them were interested enough to go back into the history of Amouage and look at this little beauty. So this is called Ubar. And look at the packaging. We'll talk a little bit about the packaging here in just a second. But it is marketed towards women. But many, many Amouages that say women is actually completely unisex. So don't hesitate one bit if you're a guy to try this. Very easy for me to wear today. I've really, really enjoyed it. So I want to talk a little bit about the history because originally Ubar came out in 2000 and I'm sorry, it originally came out in 1995, and then they re-released it in 2009. So they did away with the original, which came out in the mid 90s, and they re-released it in 2009. And so, interestingly enough, they did change some things, though, and we'll talk a little bit about the note listing. I've never smelled the original. This is the version from 2009. It is now officially discontinued, sadly. This is really good. I mean, I would even be interested in trying to maybe even find a bottle one day, but we'll talk about kind of the pros and cons of some of that. So, but first, I want to talk a little bit about the scent. I want to talk a little bit about the opening and just a bit about the fragrance. And then I want to talk about the history of the name Ubar, because I honestly had no idea what Ubar was, what it meant, and there's a very interesting meaning behind it. So, first of all, the fragrance opens up bright, orangey, floral with this oriental vibe. You could easily just classify this as a floriental if you wanted to, but in the Amouage style. And I honestly had no idea that Amouage had a floral fragrance that had this type of, this level of quality in their arsenal that was not called Amouage Gold Woman. So Gold Woman, and I've got myself an older little tester bottle. This is what the old Amouage tester bottles used to look like. And Gold Woman, actually you can see right here, it says Sultanate of Oman. And the old bottles say Sultanate of Oman, and then it went to Oman Perfumery LLC, and then Amouage, and then Amouage SAOC, or, there's been multiple iterations of Amouage, and as it was, new investors came in, and the Sultan began to sell off his, parts of his shares and stuff like that in the company. So this is an older bottle of Gold Woman, and the reason that I'm showing you this is when you think about the beginnings of Amouage, Gold Woman is what comes to mind for me. Gold Woman and Gold Man are kind of really where the Amouage journey started in 1980, must have been 1983 if memory serves. But this is the Eau de Parfum. Yeah, this is the Eau de Parfum. They also made an extrait of Gold Woman, which I've never smelled, I don't believe. But the notes, interestingly, there's a lot of, I would say, similarity between the notes, and there's some similarity between the smell. But Ubar takes it kind of to the next level, if you will. For me, anyways. I think it takes it to the next level. And this is also considered a floral oriental. So let me read the notes to you, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of the differences and why I think Ubar is maybe a little better suited to my taste. So Gold Woman is lily of the valley, rose, frankincense, orris root, jasmine, myrrh, ylang ylang, ambergris, musk, sandalwood, cedar, and civet. And if you take a look at the notes for Ubar from 2009, it's Litsea cubiba, mandarin orange, orange, violet leaf, freesia, jasmine, lily of the valley, orange blossom, rosewood, palisander rosewood is actually the official name, tuberose, ylang ylang, copiba balsam, or as they said in the actual official note listing when it came out, copahu balsam. I don't know if they're the same thing, just different ways of saying it or what, but and they also list black amber in the official note listing. Parfumo shows patchouli, sandalwood, vanilla, vetiver, and amber. And I've seen some that actually list ambergris. There's a little bit of that ambergris vibe, which we'll talk about, especially in the dry down. This is a 8-hour dry down, and this is about a 4-hour dry down. I like to reapply so I can re-experience the opening midway through. And so let's talk about the scent. So for me, instantly, the first thing that grabs me is this is an amazing quality floral oriental from Amouage that no one talks about. Which is very shocking to me because, like I said, I had no clue Amouage had this level of, this quality of a floral perfume that no one talks about. It's kind of shocking. And, you know, as someone looking to explore their floral DNA, I, of course, ended up going for Gold Woman because that's the only one I really knew about. I mean, I knew Gold Man and I knew they were kind of close to each other. And, this is Guy Robert's kind of niche take on one of Guy Robert's favorite perfumes, which was actually, it was L'Enfant Arpege. He loved L'Enfant Arpege, and he kind of recreated it multiple times in his journey. Guy Robert is one of the most well-renowned French perfumers. And as someone looking to kind of explore that Amouage DNA, a couple things jump out to me instantly. Number one, in many of the older Amouages that you'll kind of come across, this Amouage kind of staple of florals begins to emerge over and over again. And the two that constantly stand out to me, release after release after release, are jasmine and ylang ylang. Those are the two. Okay, so even if you take something like Jubilation for women, Jubilation 25 for women, you get a lot of that ylang ylang jasmine combination, and it seems to be like a Amouage staple, if you will, because even in something like Amouage Silver Crystal, which this is marketed for men, I get a lot of two florals, and sure enough, you guessed it, beautiful presentation, by the way. Yeah, you just get a lot of ylang ylang, and you get a lot of jasmine. It's like the floral Amouage, guerlanade, if you will. The Amouage odd, for me, for the floral side of things, is jasmine and ylang ylang, and you get it over and over and over again. There was another fragrance that came to mind too. Gentleman's EDT. This one as well. This is like the cologne version of Gold Man. And again, this is a tester, so it doesn't have the cool little bottle. But that's the old Amouage symbol right there. And if you take a look on the back, you'll see Gentleman's EDT. This has one of the most amazing Omani white frankincense notes you'll ever smell. And the florals, again, ylang ylang and jasmine. Big combination in many of the old Amouages, okay? And so as soon as I smelled like the florals hit, and it doesn't take long for them to hit, it opens up with a little bit of spice. And as soon as you notice the floral, that combination, you'll notice that the backbone, the Amouage DNA, is in Ubar for sure, 100%. And interestingly enough, the city of Ubar is a very important ancient Arabian city that was a key hub in the frankincense trade. So that's where the name comes from. What ended up happening is some scientists ended up using NASA's satellite technology back in the 90s to try to see if they could detect where the paths that the camels used to walk. So if you imagine over thousands and thousands of years, if you had these hubs, the camels imprinting their footprints in the sand in the same places over and over and over, traveling to the same hub cities in the desert, would leave some sort of a calling sign. So scientists in the 90s went, maybe we can use satellite technology to try to find some of these lost cities. Well, Ubar is one of those lost cities. It's actually referenced in many important books, and apparently it was one of like the key hubs, the key stopping points where the I guess the frankincense tears that would be actually taken off from the trees would be processed in Ubar and then sent to the rest of the world. And the city was apparently, or I should say, archaeologists believe, because no one knows for sure, but they believe that the city was around between 2800 BC and 300 AD. Pretty long lifespan. And there's a legend that goes with it too. There's an Arabic legend that goes with the city of Ubar. The Arabic legend has it that the rulers became so corrupt, so wealthy and so corrupt, that God basically allowed the desert to swallow it up. And it's interesting that that's the tale that's told, because whenever you read from the archaeologists, they say that the king of Ubar, or the royal family, or I don't know how it was back then, but whoever ran the city did have so much wealth that they built this giant tower and centerpiece of the city, if you will. And there were walls, there were lots of watchtowers, and so unbeknownst to them, they built it on like a granite or some sort of stone that wasn't, enough to hold the weight that they built it on. They didn't know that that's what was underneath them, and it collapsed. This granite, stone, limestone, I don't know what it was, but it ended up collapsing. And inside of that collapse came the city literally fell into the desert. So you could see as an ancient human thinking, well, God allowed the desert to swallow them up. And that was the tale that was basically told, because they were so evil. It sounds a lot like the Sodom and Gomorrah story, doesn't it? There's a little bit of a connection there in my mind. It is referenced as the Atlantis of the Sands. That's what Ubar is known as, the Atlantis of the Sands. And is it just me, or does that look like almost like the sands of a desert? That's what I got. As soon as I heard that Ubar was known as the Atlantis of the Sands, that is what I got. Sands of the desert. And, that's a really good way to describe the perfume. We'll talk a little bit about that, but I think that's probably one of the best visuals. And I'll try to take you through the visual, not just the scent, not just the smell, not just the ingredients, but the actual visual of what this gives me now that I kind of know the background of Ubar. It says that the Atlantis of the Sands is a quote that T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, actually came up with. He gave it the Atlantis of the Sands moniker for Ubar. And they think it's somewhere, to the west of Oman. So they think the placement of it is sort of if you look at a map, it's kind of to the west of Oman. And there's a couple other kind of hubs that they would stop at. But in the Quran, Ubar is described as the many-towered city whose like has not been built in the entire land. That's basically a quote from the Quran. And so I get this idea of this brilliant Arabic city in this desert in my head as I'm kind of reading these quotes. And actually the 1001 Arabian Nights quote from Lawrence of Arabia, city of Ubar, comes from that. And so it's a thought that kept going through my head as I was kind of spraying and smelling. And I just imagine like the opulence, the grandeur of this colorful, decked out king in his, in the headgear that they wear to make sure sand doesn't kind of get all over them. And I just imagine this Silk Road, this caravan that traveled, let's say, and brought frankincense between Oman and Rome and China back then, and all of the major powers of the ancient world. And one weakness you could point out in the story, the only thing that I will mention is that this fragrance has very little to do with frankincense. There is frankincense. You can smell it. You can smell the little hints of incense here, but it's not the main player. The main player are the florals and the oriental vibe. Those are the two main players for me. And with a name like Ubar, and with a, you know, history of the city being known for its packaging and final distillation of the frankincense into its product and then being shipped to the rest of the ancient world, you would think they would have maybe focused a little bit more on incense, right? But not so. Incense is not the main theme here, okay? It's the florals and it's the oriental vibe and the woods, and we'll talk a little bit about how it transitions, because it does change, but it doesn't change drastically. There are some changes, especially from the opening into what it ends up turning into, but it's a beautiful fragrance through and through. Amouage quality is all here, no doubt about it. So the setting of this long lost Arabian city in the desert home, this sparkling city, this oasis, this stop point for these caravans that are traveling through the desert. Just imagine, I can't help but trying to imagine what the life of a person who traveled in the ancient world on a damn camel throughout the desert to get to this random stopping point in the desert. And what it must have been like seeing this city emerge back in the day with lights and watchtowers and grandeur of the city. And, that is a great descriptor of the fragrance. Even the sand itself that ended up swallowing the city, somehow it does feel sandy. I don't know why, if it's just kind of this mental image from the marketing, from the fact that I realize that this really gives me this sand-like vibe, color scheme, and even the little grains, if you will, if you look closely. I for whatever reason, my brain kind of hitched on that sand-like idea. And so if you go back to what the actual note listing and how this scent breaks down, for me, you get a lot thrown at you in the opening. You can sense that patented floral DNA, hands down, jasmine, ylang ylang, but there's other florals as well. There's this lemony lily of the valley that's here. Beautiful. There is tuberose, but I think it's the least used note, is the tuberose. I don't get a whole lot of tuberose. Tuberose would usually be a no-no for me, and a lot of people think when they see tuberose, it's going to be super traditionally feminine. It's not, okay? This is completely unisex, and probably even more unisex than Gold Woman. I think Gold Woman is more traditionally feminine than Ubar, if that makes sense. And that's not what I was expecting. I had kind of this image of what this was like without ever smelling it, and it's nothing like that. So this has been a real kind of eye-opening experience for me. So you get a lot thrown at you. The sandalwood, you can sense immediately. The amber, you can sense immediately because, there is this, there's this thickness to it. And I heard some people say that in a couple reviews, and there's not very many reviews on this, but I heard someone say that they don't think that it's actually amber. They think it's ambergris. And I think it's both, because you can sense the amber. There is that oriental vibe. There's that, a lot of orientals have notes like Tolu balsam and opopanax and amber and resins and, that kind of feel, right? That ambery oriental feel. It's all here. There has to be some sort of amber creation from something. Vanilla, labdanum has to be. It's just there's nothing else that could create that accord. However, once you get into the dry down, what ends up happening to my nose is the notes end up becoming hazy, almost like you're in the desert looking off at the distance and, you get that haze, like you think you're almost seeing something that's not there because there's that haziness. that's how the fragrance begins to turn. It begins to turn into this very hazy, much more powdery. It begins to turn more powdery from something, I don't know what, and maybe a little bit more animalic, maybe, but almost like the animalic makes it even more beautiful, if that makes sense. So it doesn't turn more challenging. It turns more appealing to me. Like you've reached your destination and you're kind of ready to put your feet up. You know what I mean? Like it's that kind of feeling. You've been traveling for a long time and it's that, oh, you've arrived, you know, like you can just take a deep breath and relax for a little bit. That's what the fragrance feels like it kind of turns into. This powdery, probably there's some ambergris building that base. And of course my computer just froze. Okay, it's back. And the thing about it is there's a trio of notes that can be felt throughout, and they add this heft. They add this, you know, when I think of old school Amouages, I think of power. I think of very strong fragrances. This fragrance has that Amouage strength, but it's not overdone. You know, it's not a, I think this could be worn pretty much anywhere. Even in the summer, I would wear this. It doesn't have the doesn't have like the beast mode longevity or of Interlude Man or things like that. You know what I mean? But there's 3 notes that add to kind of the heft of the fragrance. One is patchouli, one is amber, and one is vanilla. Those 3 notes play a very important role, I think, in kind of grounding the perfume. Now, there is a little bit of a violet leaf when you first spray. And the violet leaf, if you've ever smelled the violet leaf in something like this, MDCI's Invasion Barbare, you'll kind of get an idea of the way that the violet leaf was implemented in Ubar, because the violet leaf isn't like the violet leaf in Fahrenheit or anything like that. No, it's more of the way it's used in Invasion Barbare. It's not like you're smelling the gasoline itself like in Fahrenheit. It's like you're smelling maybe something that was in a car that you filled up with gasoline. You're getting just a little bit of a hint of like a, you know, like something that's been passed down the line, and the thickness and the power of that note has been really removed. You know what I mean? You can still get a little bit of the violet leaf in something like Invasion Barbare, but for me, it's more that vanilla, that barbershop vanilla, right? The violet leaf is kind of more in the back, adding that depth. That's what the violet leaf feels like in Ubar. It's definitely here, and it makes it even easier to wear for a man, I think. But really what you end up getting in the opening is the power of this dual orange citrus opening, mandarin orange and orange. And what's interesting is there's also a note of Litsea cubiba, which Litsea cubiba, interestingly enough, is this evergreen shrub that's native to China. And I've talked about it on the channel before. It can be lemony, citrusy, you know, tangy, all this stuff. And usually it's used to extend the citruses into the dry down. There's very little citruses here. If there's any bergamot, it's a splash, right? And actually reading the back, here's the back little blurb. The back says, romancing the mystery of Ubar's splendor. Splendor is a good word for this fragrance. Paradise is regained with echoes of bergamot and lily of the valley, complementing the majestic Damascene rose with the eternal presence of sandalwood. Eternal presence. Interesting. And so normally that Litsea cubiba is meant to really drag out the citrus notes, so you feel them longer, because normally the citruses are very volatile and they just kind of, you know, fly off your skin, right? And here, the Litsea cubiba has the very interesting effect of keeping the orange note in play longer. And what it does, interestingly enough, is it turns the fragrance, the closest fragrance to the opening of this fragrance that I've ever smelled. After the first 5 or 10 minutes or so, once that, once the pungent opening begins to kind of settle and the spices settle and all that stuff, and there's a little bit of spice, I think, but nothing major. I wouldn't call this a spice bomb or anything like that. Once it all settles, it turns the fragrance into something that begins to smell like Frederic Mall's Noir Peace. Noir Peace is a Michel Rudnitska fragrance, and the whole idea was to create this lighter, airier Oriental where there was orange and spices, and it kind of focused on, it didn't focus on this heavy vanilla, right? It was like a lighter take on an Oriental. And if you've ever smelled Noir Peace, you'll know exactly what I mean with that orangey Oriental opening. There's some orangey Oriental touch here in the opening that will remind you of it. But imagine Frederic Mall's Noir Peace, but with the splendor of Amouage's beautiful floral DNA and that heavy Oriental heart. Because the Oriental heart is heavy here. It's rich, it's dense. Maybe there's a little bit of decadence in there, That's what the people of Ubar were. They were decadent, right? God apparently forced the desert to swallow them up because they were so decadent and evil. There's a little bit of decadence in here. It's actually surprisingly very, very good. I was not expecting to like it as much as I did. The ylang ylang is beautiful, and it adds this creamy, bit to it. Ylang ylang can sometimes add this creaminess, and it does. And once the spices and that orange note start to finally feel like they fade, and it takes a long time because of the fact that, that let's say a Kubiba note really kind of stretches it into what seems to be much longer territory than what you might normally feel. That's where you get a little bit of that smoky, who knows where it comes from. Maybe it comes from the Copahu or Copiba balsam. I don't know what the difference is. Parfumo says Copiba. Amouage's old literature says Copahu resin or balsam. I don't know. But there's a little bit of this smoky vibe that will kind of remind you that the city of Ubar was once that incense, hub of the ancient world. And it feels, you could use words like balanced, outstanding material quality. And the changeover, what ends up happening is after the 4 to 5 hour mark, it begins to get more and more powdery. And on my skin, it begins to get more and more powdery. The high quality combination of, that ylang ylang and jasmine with the supporting cast of florals, begins to get more powdery, and that richness never leaves, though. That's the thing. That decadent, rich quality of the fragrance, it remains. It really feels like it just kind of transitions from slightly creamy from the ylang ylang playing the front role, maybe to letting some of that ambergris add a little bit of animalics, the amber really taking over the vanilla, that powdery oriental dry down that you would expect kind of takes over, and it truly is something amazing. This is Amouage when it was kind of at the peak of its power, I think, when it was doing stuff like this, an Epic Man, Interlude Man, when they were making these kind of fragrances. That's Amouage for me. And I know this is a remake, but this was still 2009. This was early in Christopher Chong's tenure. And I can't help but just stand back and just sit in awe at everything that he did. Even the stuff I didn't know about, I love. I love it. It's unbelievable to me that Amouage let him go. You know what I mean? It almost feels like letting Michael Jordan go in his prime, you know, and I know he was there for a long time. He had a long reign as creative director at Amouage, and he really took them from one place to another, and the place that he took them to was miles ahead of the house that he inherited. But still, I mean, it's amazing that he was let go, and it just makes me think, God, what else haven't I discovered? So we're gonna have an Amouage day today because we're gonna do a live stream today. After this, well, later after this, and I'm gonna try 4 new Amouage fragrances, well, new to me for women that I've never smelled. So I'm gonna be covered in women's Amouage fragrances today, but this is definitely a find. Thank you to Ali, who sent me the decant. Thank you to Armando, who sent me the official branded sample. You know, if you like that Amouage Oriental musky floral vibe, I think this is definitely one to give a sniff to. Bottles are expensive, though. Prepare yourself. Just be prepared, okay? Bottles are expensive. You're going to pay for this one. It might be something that's worth it to me, though. So thanks again for watching, everybody. Let me know if you have any experience with Ubar. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedback. Thank you to everyone who's supported me and who joins the live. I love interacting with you guys. It's just cool how on the live stream we can just kind of jump around. We can talk about one thing that kind of leads to another. Someone mentions a fragrance, I can kind of reach back and grab it, and we can talk about it, and it's a cool thing. So thank you to everyone again. I usually don't say this, or I don't say it enough, but liking and subscribing helps the YouTube algorithm. So I would appreciate that. And we're very close to 3,000 subscribers, which is crazy to me. That I mean, we're a year into this only, and we're already almost at 3,000 subs, which is crazy because some of my icons who really do this, like Chris from Scentland, I think he's only at 10 or 11,000 subs, and he's like one of the OGs, you know. So 3,000 may not seem like a lot, but I'm not a numbers guy. I don't care, you know, if it's one person watching it or 1 million, I'll be happy. So anyways, thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you got something out of the Ubar review, and I hope to see you this evening. Cheers, guys. Bye now.